So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our evening program where we'll be talking about mental health and emotional well-being, especially during a time like this. As you know, we are currently going through unprecedented times. I feel like I've heard that word so many times, but we are truly living in unprecedented times. And we have some experts today to talk to us a little bit about our mental health. And also about emotional well-being through this time that we're living in. So thank you all for tuning in. If you do have questions, you can put your questions in the chat and we'll get back to you. And I am going to ask the guests at the end if they have any additional information that they can send us or any contact details if you want to reach out to them personally. So let's get started with this conversation. We have a very special panel ahead of us today, and I'm going to get everybody to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Dr. Michelle Sancho. I usually call her Auntie Michelle, but she is Dr. Michelle Sancho. So I'll just ask you to introduce yourself to us, talk to us a bit about what you do, and also you can tell us, in one word, can you sum up 2020?
Right, okay. So I'm Michelle Sancho, and my professional background is that of an educational psychologist. So I'm actually a principal educational psychologist, but I also act as a service manager. So I manage a number of services around children and young people's mental health from up to the age of 25. So we've got mental health support teams that I sort of oversee the manager of, and we've got Emotional Health Academy that sort of provides early support for mental health support, educational psychology service, and a range of other services. So that's sort of my day job, and I'm also a CBT therapist as well.
Okay, excellent. And in one word, what would you sum up 2020 as being?
I find it hard to condense myself into one word. But some people would say sort of erased, wiped out. You know, some people were sort of celebrating birthdays, but then saying they didn't count the 2028 because it was just like, you know, it's a write.
It was a crazy year.
You know, unprecedented is a word, like you say, that loads of people have used all the time. It was just, I kept feeling as if I was in a sci-fi movie, only I woke up and I was still in it. So I thought, well, actually, it's obviously not a movie then, it's reality. And that's kind of how it felt like. And in fact, I challenged myself to watch some of these movies, you know, that have this kind of thing in them, and they were not half as scary as reality. So
what's going on?
Yeah, so I think 2020 was quite a challenge.
Yeah.
However, on the positive side, I would say it's thrown us forward about 30 years in terms of how we work, and how creative we've been. But there've been a whole host of challenges.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, thank you for joining us today. And we'll obviously be hearing from you later on in this conversation. So the next guest that I would like to introduce is Olivia. She actually, I've got to know her over the past, I would say 5 years, really, that we've got to know each other. But if you could just share with everybody who's on this call today, just a bit about yourself and what you do, and if you could sum up your 2020 in one word as well, please. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, my name is Olivia. I'm actually based in Birmingham. Currently I go to Handsworth Church, even though, you know, there's no church at the moment, but that's where I reside. I am a speech and behaviour specialist for children primarily with autism. A lot of them have other special needs, but autism is because most of them have ASD and have been diagnosed with ASD. And I've been doing that for almost 7 years now. so quite a while. It's not something that I chose to do initially, just kind of fell into the job, and I've stayed and I absolutely love it. I love working with children. It's one-to-one. I essentially teach them and help them through school subjects, maths, English, science, and all the rest, but also just their own personal care and understanding of the world, and of course their speech if they have trouble with their speech. Yes, and I very much enjoy it. It's very interesting to work with children that aren't necessarily talking back at you, but we know the majority of our communication is not actually through what we say, and it's mostly non-verbal anyway, so we communicate very well in other ways. Yes, I'm trying to think of my word for 2020. I think for me personally, I would probably say it was a year of change. A lot of things changed for me personally in 2020. I went through a lot of different various circumstances to which I have challenged me, but I am better for it. So I'm going into 2021. I think a different, fresher person. Yes, change.
Okay. Cool. Okay. That sounds excellent. Cool. So the next guest that we have today is Joseph Linton. So welcome, Joseph. Thank you for joining us for this program today. If you could just share with everybody a little bit more about who you are and what it is that you do. And also for yourself, if you can give us a word that sums up what your 2020 was like.
Right. I'm a psychoanalytic, a retired psychoanalytic psychotherapist, and I've worked for over 40 years in mental health, both in the NHS and in private practice as well. So to sum up the year in one word, I'm finding that extremely difficult, but I would say cancelled.
Good word.
You know, I'm thinking of the young people, exams being cancelled, people losing their jobs, musicians, which I am as well, a musician, venues and, opportunities to perform being cancelled, people losing their jobs, half pay or furlough and all sorts of things. You know, it has really been a year of, we hear the term cancel culture. I'm not really sure exactly what that meant, but I think applying to this, it seems apt, that the virus has really swept through the world and cancelled everything from travel to, school exams. But at the same time, it's also been a year of tremendous innovation and creativity, because people have had to use, that creative spirit that we all have as human beings, to think of different ways of communicating, such as this, different ways of saving money, different ways of working. As a musician now, I'm working online, and I'm in the studio every week online, and it's great, and it's been very creative for me.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today. And I'm sure that as we go on later, you can give us some insight into what dealing with this period that we're living in, the effects that has on our work routines and stuff like that. So thanks for joining. And lastly, today we have a special guest, Angela. Welcome and thank you for joining us. And again, if you could just share with us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you actually do. And also your word to sum up 2020.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Angela Sterling Noel, and I have been working in counselling and psychotherapy for just about 20 years now. And I work with children, families, couples, work systemically, and also using play therapy with children and young people. At the moment, I run a private practice, and I also go into a special needs school and work with the young people there as well, working with the families as well. So one of the things that I would say last year brought up for me was chaos. But my main word is creativity. This is Joseph said, having to find new ways of working, going online, working with Zoom, the challenge of working with families online and so on. It's been an interesting year for me, and I found it, yeah, interesting.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. Now, as you guys all know, we have been definitely living in some very unprecedented times. I was reading a post last week, and it was saying that the new World War III that we're about to go through and experience is going to be a mental health one. And that was something that really stood out to me, because it made me think that almost like the effects of a world war on our mental health is something that we are actually about to go through, especially this year, with consideration to all the lockdowns that we've had, the alternative facts that everybody seems to live in a different world of alternative facts in relation to different things. You can kind of feel very isolated, but very much mixed up in this huge world of moving parts, but everybody has different versions of facts. There's so many different things going on. And so they say that mental health is going to be the World War III that we didn't expect. What do you guys think about that? And what do you think the effects that this pandemic has had in general on our society so far? So we'll start with Auntie Michelle, or Dr. Michelle Sanchez.
Yeah, so the other way that they've said it is that that's a new pandemic, mental health crisis. So what we do know is that the mental health services for children and young people have seen more referrals and cases and their waiting list than they've ever seen before. Now that's unsurprising, really, given what we are going through. But in 2017, there was research to show that the mental health difficulties were on the increase back then. So what we're seeing now is what we knew was a case that was on the rise in terms of mental health difficulties, and then we've got the pandemic. I've been involved in supporting a range of organisations internationally recover. So we had the first lockdown and everybody thought that we were after that in the recovery phase, but of course we've had 2 more since then, and so what you're having now is something that we're probably going to be with in terms of mental health difficulties. They're saying for the lifetime of the young people that are young at the moment, it's probably going to have an impact on them for their lifetime in one way or another. I think what's been particularly challenging for, well, you sort of talked about society, but I'll sort of start with schools and children and young people, is just everybody, is the uncertainty. The uncertainty. I mean, we've got, if you look at what happened around school closures recently in Christmas, you know, you've got Christmas and school closures. So you had, right, everyone can have a Christmas. And then actually, no, you can't, not if you're in tier 4, which is most of you are, you know, and then we had, right, no, go back to school on the Monday, and then, oh, no, now we're on lockdown on Tuesday. So, you know, anxiety generally is around having difficulty living with uncertainty, but we're all living with uncertainty now. And so we're all living with heightened anxiety, and there's so much news around sort of the next variant and around this and around that, that actually society as a whole, the level of anxiety is just raised. Also, you can see, as Joseph was talking about, this sort of cancelled bit, every element of our society, every fabric of our society even down to church, has not been left untouched. So, you know, the things that people would often do as coping mechanisms, they perhaps can't do. So people who would go out and connect with people, you know, you're locked down, so you can't necessarily do that. But the sort of institutions that you go to for perhaps a piece of normality around school, a routine, you may not be able to do that. So just every aspect of our society has changed and has been impacted. But, you know, on the one hand, you have all of that, you have all of the change, you have all of the, Angela used the word chaos, but on the other hand, you have the innovation. But all of this is going to have, even the innovation is going to have an impact on your well-being, because you've got to get with it in order to access anything. In order to access school, you've got to understand Teams or Zoom. And we've got some facts and some figures that Anne-Marie has just been alerting me to, that there's been a 60% disruption in mental health services, and then vulnerable children, including for vulnerable children. And I think what we know as well is that if you had some vulnerability before this, you're much more likely to find this pandemic really challenging. So you might have had pre-existing mental health difficulties, because remember, we knew those were on the rise anyway, but you also may have a very difficult home life. And so all of this will have amplified.
So, yeah, thank you. So COVID has basically been like a catalyst to everything that was already existing that was a problem. Okay, so Joseph, explain to us, or talk a little bit about the effects that the whole stopping and starting in lockdown, and then we're not in lockdown anymore, the effects that actually has on every single like individual trying to function and navigate through this period that we're in.
That is very, very pertinent for me at the moment. The way in which the authorities or the government have handled the management of the community, basically, you know, and how we're trying to sort of slow down the spread of the virus, because the virus is completely out of control. You know, we have to face the facts, but yet the messages or the tone that's coming from the government is one of triumph. And then egg on their face in the next maybe hour or so, when they have to change their mind about this triumphant plan that they put in place, as Michelle was talking about, you know, this mixed messages that we're getting from the government. And this has caused tremendous, I think it has a tremendous impact on the mental health of the community, because they are not sure of where they stand. And there's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than having a sense of insecurity, you know, a clear message, a clear plan to create and raise anxieties. I have to talk about my own personal experience. I have a daughter that lives in London, and we were due to have Christmas together. My wife passed away 3 years ago, and it was going to be our first Christmas as a family together. So we were really eager to come together and, you know, come together as a family for the first time at Christmas. And then suddenly we got the news that London had gone into tier 4. So she couldn't travel. Now there was a debate as to whether we were going to break the rules and just go down, rush down, and bring her back up to Birmingham. And then I dithered, because we were in Birmingham, we were in tier 3, so it was more relaxed. I dithered until I came to the decision on the last minute to say, no, you can't come. And that created a tremendous amount of disappointment and anxiety. And it impacted on the family in general. And I'm using my family as a kind of example of how it must have impacted on other families around the country as well. And you know, thankfully, my family are kind of emotionally mature enough that we could come together and we could talk about my vacillating and my lack of definition, you know, and plan, and we could come to we could work through, you know, some of the discontent that they had, and everything worked out fine in the end. But it made me think about the impact that this had on, or is having on, the wider community, and how people must have felt.
Definitely.
And the indecision from management, you know, I think has added to the mental health, the poor mental health of the nation, I think. And the government really have to take responsibility for that, which they are not doing. They're blaming it all on those people who are breaking lockdown rules.
It's definitely that stopping and starting and indecision definitely has an effect. I was watching BBC South Today or something, and this lady had so they closed everything down, and she had then gone out of her way to make sure that her bar was COVID friendly. She had all the screens set up and everything, spent money, because for her, that was a worthwhile investment to keep her business going. But because of the stopping and starting, she said that she might as well have just kept her business closed for the rest of the year, because she's lost money now in investing in trying to make sure that her business is COVID friendly, when she could have just kept it closed and waited. So that stopping and starting is definitely, I think, having such a negative effect. 1 minute we can have Christmas together, the next minute we can't. You know, it doesn't seem like, for many people, the year feels like it's ended either, which is, you know, Christmas is kind of like a significant end to a year for us, and the things that usually end our year and start a new year for us mentally haven't happened. So a lot of people feel like they're in a continuation of this nightmare that we've been in. But that's a very good points that you raised. So Olivia, if we talk to us then a little bit about the effects that social media is currently having during this time, because there are some very extreme effects, as in we have people living in an alternative reality of facts when it comes down to COVID, when it comes down to the vaccine and all of that stuff, and then people living in a completely different set of facts. We've got such a polarized society right now with what's going on, and I think that social media has a very strong part to play. So if you talk to us maybe about the effects social media has, the negative ones, but also the positive ones as well, for coping with this period.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to talk about the positive first. There's been such a massive turnaround, I feel, with our churches in understanding what needs to be done to help support our church members, and obviously the people around us as well. Obviously there isn't anything physical that we can go to, so I think a lot of our churches have done extremely well to provide, especially Parkside, that online service. I think it's been invaluable. The dedication that a lot of people have put into, and it's been almost a year now. This is, you know, consistently, and we had no idea how long this was going to last. I very much appreciate all the different programs that have been taking place that I can get involved with, and to a certain extent, it's so nice that I wouldn't have been able to interact and fellowship with so many different varieties of people in different places if it wasn't for this actually happening. You're limited to, you know, the 52 weeks of the year, and Sabbath only happens once a week, so unless you're traveling each week to a different church, which the likelihood you're probably not because of certain commitments, it's obviously difficult to meet and socialize with different people. And so I definitely really appreciate the fact that we have this platform now, and I'm hoping that this doesn't stop you know, when churches do open back, I hope that we can carry this on, and understand its importance. I also think in this, because we've had to use the online platform so much, that appreciation for the younger people. In my particular church, there has been some issues with how much the younger people are a part of the integral running of the churches. And of course, now that this has happened, having to rely upon the younger people so much more than we probably ever have before, to be able to do all the little things that in my parents' generation kind of struggle with, again, I think has opened the door to a kind of mutual level of understanding and respect across the different ages, the different age groups. And again, I'm hoping that will continue. That doesn't just stop just because the church is open back. So yeah, I definitely really appreciate that. I definitely see, even just in general, a lot of people that I know have started online ministries also. And there's lots of people making books, and it's just amazing how creative people are being as well, is that you don't have this and this available to you. Right, what can I do to share my ministry, share what I'm passionate about, to engage people. I think it's incredible that we have been able to tap into that sides of us maybe that we never really have had to tap into before, or even had the opportunity to, because life gets in the way. You know, when everything's open back, the general day-to-day running of life doesn't mean that you always have time to invest in yourself, I think. And I think, like I said, that's why I am so grateful that there are so many online platforms available. Now, obviously, on the flip side, we are staring at a screen for the majority of our day. That is having effects that I'm not going to talk on those effects because I don't know personally about the statistics on that. But of course, staring at a screen is not going to be healthy for you on a day-to-day for long periods of time. Just general tiredness. I feel it in myself. There's a light on me. I'm staring at this screen, and this is a majority of my day. Of course, in terms of just how I sleep at night is going to be affected. And just generally with my eyesight will deteriorate over time, I'm sure, because of this. Thank God that I haven't seen the effects so much yet. But like I said, I'm hoping that it's not going to be for years and years to come, God willing. So it won't have a substantial effect on my eyesight. But I take that into consideration. Obviously, I take into consideration massively, especially again for a lot of the younger people, is that we are looking at everybody doing everything. 20 years ago, there wasn't this, even 10 years ago, really, there wasn't so much of a connection with everybody. Everybody's in everybody's business. What are you doing over there? What are you doing over there? Whereas before that it's because you know somebody and you call them up and you tell them about what you're doing. But now I'm here, I'm in your living room, I'm with you at work, I'm everywhere with you. And in an instant, I can be connected into somebody else's world. And as much as to a certain extent, that's quite fascinating, I think, again, it can detract from your own personal life. You can get so caught up in what everybody else is doing, everybody else's world, that you don't spend time with yourself. And that's one thing I would say over the past year, that I've had a lot of time to self-reflect, as much as, of course, the bombardment of things on social media would have obviously impacted me. I've had a lot of time to self-reflect on who I am as a person, and what I'm here to do. What do I mean? What value do I have? That, again, I wouldn't have had before. But it is difficult, especially as a young person. I'm sure even those in their teens. I'm 27, so it doesn't affect me so much more than I think. It doesn't affect me as much as a teenager would at this time, especially with the changes with school routines and things like that. But yeah, definitely, I think looking at other people, what they're doing, and obviously everyone puts in their best self when they come on social media platforms. No one's putting the hardships of the day or the things that they're really struggling with a lot of the time. It's very much a case of, oh, look at all the things that look how wonderful my life is, look how great I am. everyone's gone to Dubai now, you know, and for those who can't jump on a plane, it's thinking, it then makes you feel even worse about your current situation. And so again, like I said, it's there are, like I said, there were so many positives, so many positives from having this platform, but I think it's really important to highlight the underlying issues that are arising with young people, especially looking at everybody else and what everybody else is doing, and being caught up in what they think life should be like, and then spending very little time on themselves, and then also comparing themselves quite heavily and quite abruptly, I feel, to other people who are so far removed from their real life that they wouldn't have any connection with this person if it wasn't for, you know, Instagram or Facebook. So it's really important that we highlight both areas.
Both sides, definitely. I think that so I was reading an article from the Washington Post, and it was saying that this celebrity culture and celebrity lifestyle, all of that Hollywood, all of it's dying a very sad death, because people have started to see how certain lifestyles or people that they follow or they attain to be like are nothing in the face of a global pandemic. Like the value that they had brought to that person's life just no longer exists. At the moment, there's a rise in popularity for politicians or policymakers, people who can have an active effect in our day-to-day life. And it's almost like there's an awakening of people's mindset in terms of our focus and what we find as important. And I think social media has been great in terms of connecting us, but also it has caused a lot of that space to die a slow death, or begin the decline of that celebrity space as well. And also I wanted to mention about social media, the effects of a lot of misinformation that has been going around as well. I don't know, Olivia, if you want to touch on that, the effects that having some people literally believe in one different set of facts and another person literally believes in another set of facts. And we're both living in real life together, but online, our entire environment is different to each other. And we're now so polarized, but on this topic of COVID, for example, because of that. So yeah, if you just...
It seems, you know, everybody's a doctor, everyone's a specialist in all things, all matters of understanding what's going on. I feel everyone can put up a statement of, oh, it's okay that you're struggling with this, do what makes you happy. You know, you see those things all the time. Or, oh, you know, don't believe in this is a conspiracy theory, just do your own thing. There's so many opinions that are being flooded in our spaces, and you can, if you're not careful, you can just end up believing everything, to be honest, and not really taking time to think, is okay, what does this mean to me, what is important right now, what matters, because, you know, anyone can put up a statistic, anyone, like I said, anyone can claim to be something that they're not, and it can look so real, it can look so believable, and if you don't do your research, you would think, oh, that's happening, oh, that's not very good, or oh, that's really bad, I'm going to share this, and this gets sent out via text, and you know, you share this on social media, and suddenly, you know, what was an opinion of somebody sitting in their room that thought, oh, let's just put this up for fun, has turned into something that goes into some kind of academic book, you know, and it sounds far removed, but that's actually what is happening. And then on top of that, like I said, you've got all these conspiracy theories about what's going on, and all these the protests and the riots and different things like that, about who's in charge, why is this happening, it's because of this, is it because of this, is it because of that, and I think as Christians, as believers in the word, I think it's important always to reflect back on, what does this mean to me, why, what should I focus on, why is it important also for me to sit back, stop, look at information and say, you know what, actually, I don't need that. I'm not going to open Facebook today. I'm not going to open up Instagram today. I'm not going to open up Twitter today, because you can, especially even just Google, Google anything that's going on. You can get so caught up in believing everything and anything that anybody has to say, because everybody's opinion is valid. Everybody has to have a voice. Everybody has to matter. That you can forget that you yourself also matter, and your mental health actually matters as well. And if it's not something that is adding to you and adding to your situation in a positive way, then you probably don't need it.
Yeah, it's true. This social media has played so it takes 6 months for somebody to become indoctrinized and radicalized in some level of conspiracy theory, because since COVID, because of the fact that we've been locked down, people have had time to find themselves in a black hole of information. And the crazy thing about it is the way that these algorithms are set up is they're designed to feed you more of what you already believe. So for a whole period of 6 months, somebody is getting lots of information that's supporting what they are already believing. And instead of us working together as a collective set of people with ideas, we're veering off like this because these algorithms send us what we want to see. And we know that this is a very high level tactic that even the Russian KGB used to take down governments in the past. That spreading of misinformation that created infighting in a lot of countries. So we know that it's quite a dangerous tactic, and I think that it definitely has had an effect on people's mental health. Just not knowing what the truth is, like not being able to trust what you read. It's very difficult to distinguish between that. So if we just go to Angela, then so we've been talking about the effects of the pandemic this year, the stopping and the starting, the effects of social media. How would you say the pandemic has affected us as a whole group of people and our collective morale amongst us as people? Would you say that the pandemic has affected that?
Well, I think the pandemic has created a lot of fear in people's lives. People are going around with fear. Parents are confused and don't know what to do. They feel a lack of support. I've been working with a young person recently who's very suicidal. Parent doesn't feel that she's got enough support. The tier system has affected so many people. In fact, one of the situations that she was sharing with me was that somewhere along the line, the National Health Service are so full that they can't support this child in the right way. So we have problems like that, where the system is overloaded on us as a society. They just can't cope with the demand. We have people having to change their careers. I've spoken to a few pastors, for example. Some of them are going towards counseling and other types of careers in order to cope, because their roles might be changing. Demand in the church is not as much as since we've been on doing the online church and so on. We've got teachers having to change the way in which they teach. If you think about it, it's not normal to sit behind a screen to teach a whole class of students. And then the impact of that on the parents having to support the children at home. This is also, some parents feel really much out of their depth, unable to teach their children. And so the education system, the children are suffering. I think Joseph was the one that said that there's a lot of cancelling of exams. Every time I hear, GCSEs are not being done this year. When I heard that again, I thought, wow, that is quite serious. And I'm just really grateful that I'm not raising my children in this time. But it is a very serious time for many, many parents and for our young people. Young people are not able to cope. Some of them, as I said, are suicidal. Some are very fearful. We have depression, which is just on the rise. A number of my clients come in with depression. So as a whole, it's affecting the society in a very negative way. But we also do have to remember that there are a lot of people who are very creative and finding new ways to rise above the impact and the effects of the pandemic.
Okay. Okay, excellent. So we're going to just go into a bit more detail about some specific groups, just so that we can kind of explore really the main effects that are affecting these groups of people, and also if there are people that are watching, how these groups of people can maybe look at dealing with that issue. So I wanted to actually start off with young people, Olivia, currently young working adults, especially. Some of us were promised an amazing life after we graduate from university with an amazing job and a career for life. And we're oftentimes, most of us are finding that, especially during this time, it almost feels like, was it worth it? Everything that I put myself through, all my studies, my career and all of that, was it all of that worth it during this time? How are you finding that even yourself is dealing with COVID and the effects of this lockdown? Are you finding that you're coming to some new truths about yourself or about things that we may have always thought were true or whatever? How are you finding it? And what do you think the effects are on other people within your age group?
Yeah, so I think I was saying earlier about I've 2020, oh my goodness, look at me. We're in 2021. 2020 was a year of change for me. I had so much time to reflect on, and I stripped myself back. I stripped myself right back, and I started with who am I? Who am I? And then who am I in relation to myself, my family, to God, and then it's who am I to other people around me. So in my wider circles at work, what do I want to do with my life? What do I want to achieve? Where am I going? How am I getting there? And just like I said, looking at the foundations of what makes me me, has been great. Not necessarily the process itself, very difficult. It's very difficult for you to see yourself for who you really are, all the bits that you don't really like to think about on a regular basis, all the things that you know you're struggling with, all the things that you know are an issue. I found that was hard, but I feel so much better for it, and I'm so glad I can go into this next year in a different headspace than I was before. I've been quite fortunate that I've not been hugely affected by work-wise by this situation, because I work with vulnerable children. It means that, and they have EHC plans, which are educational health care plans. It means that they still require education regardless of the circumstances, and so I've still been going in. Now, of course, I've kind of been putting myself in a vulnerable position because I'm working in people's homes, I'm working in schools, and obviously exposing myself quite massively to the possibility of contracting the virus, but it hasn't affected, for me, it hasn't affected my work, it hasn't affected how I interact with the children. I can see the effect on them, but generally speaking, I've been quite fortunate in that way. There are a lot of people who are around my age who just came out of education in terms of maybe their masters, or even just changed their course, and now there's nothing for them. I've got one friend who I think still is struggling to find a job after almost a year, and it's so difficult for you to obviously apply yourself in areas where, in fields where it needs to be that you are in contact with people. They require you to be in a building as opposed to online. A lot of jobs obviously can be done online, but there are so many actually that require you to be there. And of course the government has helped out businesses financially, but they're not remembering those who are completely out of work. And it mentally, I can see for myself that it's so draining. You're devalued. You're wondering, okay, what do I do with the rest of my life? How do I go forward from here? And that's those who are in a position where they don't necessarily have any extra responsibilities, like a family of their own and a mortgage and children and things like that. And then I've got friends that are in that position that then are struggling, and it's and even just from coming fresh out of university at 21 even, and not knowing what to do. Where do you go? What kind of job am I going to get now? What does that look like? What does my career look like now? And a lot of people as well are tailoring their skills to an online based workspace. So if you might have gone down one route in your mind, obviously there was a pandemic, so now it's okay, what can I do that is always online, so that I have at least got some kind of career to go into. It's been very, 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 very challenging. And although it might seem that everything's okay because, you know, we're online and we're sharing ourselves, but really, well and truly, it's so difficult to feel like just a lack of self-worth and self-understanding and appreciation. Even Auntie Annie's put many of them, because of their age, their employers, like people our age, a lot of our employers might not trust them to be able to do work from home because of their inexperience. It's like, oh, you know, you haven't shown us that you have the ability to do this, so why should we employ you over somebody else? And it's that competition now, a huge competition, you know, whereas there would have been maybe 20 people applying for one job, there's now 50 people applying for the one job. And what puts me above me as a graduate, what makes me better or more capable of doing this job than someone who's been in the field for 5 years, and I can't even get experience right now. And it's like I said, it's so difficult at this point in your life, when you're identifying who you are and what you do in your world, in this world, and what you want to achieve, and not be able to do that.
Definitely. I think that is definitely very true. And I think there's a lot of things that I've spent a lot of time with different people that have said that this year has been a real year of learning and unlearning things as well. Everything about our life has been affected in some way, shape or form. And I think that definitely has shifted the way that we think about our future. I know a lot of people are now like, well, this is how things could be. I might just actually follow my plans in my life rather than wait around to do it. Some people have started them because what we perceived beforehand to be, you know, the way that things were supposed to be hasn't actually turned out that way. So that's some very good points there. So Auntie Michelle, to move on to you, we want to talk a little bit about children going through this period with COVID, and also maybe teenagers as well. And how do you think they are receiving it or understanding it? Because it's very interesting for us to look at this from a perspective of an adult, even if you're a young adult and very inexperienced, like this is something that you can deal with. Well, you can cope with, but as a child, like, I wonder how they're actually perceiving what's going on, and how they see everything from COVID to the lockdowns to the protests to everything. How do you think they are seeing it, and how do you think that we should be working with them to deal with, you know, their perception of this current period?
Well, for some of them, they will be getting their key messages from their family and their parents. So if parents are anxious, which actually people are probably becoming increasingly more anxious, and giving them sort of the message that actually it's all out of control and, you know, it's all terrible and we're all going to catch it, then they'll probably be getting, you know, more and more anxious. If they've got family at home, and I'm sort of talking about the younger children at the moment, who sort of explain things to them, keep them a little away from the news too much, and just sort of explain, but are sort of realistic about what's happening, but in a sort of measured way, then they're probably going to be more likely to be understanding as much as you can. Obviously, it's a situation that's quite scary for most people who are even resilient. But I think you take your lead often from the adults in your life as a young person, sort of at least sort of primary age or quite young. And so, yeah, it's helpful to have adults and people around you who can explain things to you. I mean, I think something that has been difficult for everybody is that we would often say if something traumatic's happened to a young person, then actually the routine of schools normally helps them. So even though sort of home might be difficult or aspects of life might be difficult, if you've got the routine of school, that kind of helps you to get back to sort of normality. Well, of course, we don't really have school as a regular routine, but I think schools to a certain extent are still important. They can still give that message, you know, and they can, schools are better now, I think, in this lockdown. The first lockdown, obviously schools weren't used to online learning, so some schools were really keeping in touch with young people, and others kind of, it was just do what you can by yourself with your parents, and you didn't really see it, they didn't really see or keep in contact with them. I think a lot of young parents have struggled as well, though, because they may be trying to work as well as homeschool. It's really quite challenging. I think as an older young person, somebody in secondary aged, actually it's been quite challenging because, you know, you're thinking, am I taking these exams or am I not taking these exams? Is it, you know, what's my future going to look like? If you're sort of at that point of going into uni, potentially going into uni, then that's really quite a stressful time anyway. We know that exams are a trigger for poor mental health for a lot of young people, but to have this uncertainty behind it where you don't really know what game you're playing anymore. You don't really know whether this is going to be an exam, whether it's going to be altered. You've been home self-isolating, so you've missed a lot of school. Now your teacher isn't in. So, you know, it's quite an anxiety-provoking situation, even if you sort of see yourself as having quite good...
And I guess, yeah, I was going to say, and I guess that coupled with streams of misinformation that is spread as well must give rise to a lot of anxiety to young people because of that just uncertainty, especially as if you consider, you know, any path that you were to look at before, every path was very quite clear and straightforward, and this is obviously a time when none of that is the case. So that actually makes a lot of sense, and it actually, I think there's been a rise as well in substance abuse during this period amongst young people, younger than there even was before. And that, I guess, is down to the fact that there's so much uncertainty. A lot of people are struggling to control how they feel about that. So maybe they're suppressing it by using substances to manage that space that they're in.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you are feeling distressed, you will often, what we do say, is self-medicate. You'll find a way to make yourself feel better. Now, if you've got somebody to talk to who can help you express your feelings, then perhaps you might use that route. But if you haven't, and you're locked up in your room, or you can't see your friends and you can't do the things that you'd normally do, then some of those coping, you know, mechanisms might be ones that we would say aren't so helpful. So what young people, I suppose, need to be doing is trying to look at sort of coping mechanisms that they find helpful, or that are helpful to them in the sort of longer term, rather than the short term things that make you feel good now but actually lead to longer term problems. But you can sort of see why people would be turning to alcohol and using substances to try and numb how they're feeling, how anxious and worried and low they might be feeling.
That's very true. There was an article that was on LinkedIn that was talking about this, a gentleman who said that lockdown turned him into an alcoholic, you know, because he was just trying to cope every single day and navigate this period that we were in, and he turned into an alcoholic, according to him, just because of this period that we were going through. So that definitely must have that kind of effect, especially on young people whose whole future seems very uncertain, and the very people that we've grown up trusting are not so sure about what's going on either. So I think that definitely plays a part. Okay. So Joseph, I want to talk a little bit about the effects that this period is having maybe on men, and I know that there's some statistics there as well, but also the effects that this period is having on like the working industry. I know, for example, since this summer happened and the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests that occurred, a lot of Black people in the workspace have kind of, because of this kind of social awakening, this racial reckoning that has occurred, it's actually changed their working experience. Companies have been a little bit more open-minded to figuring out how to work with Black people or people of different colors during this period. So what's your take on the effect that COVID has actually had on the workspace, positive and negative effects COVID's had in the working industry?
In the working industry. I feel a little bit out of my depth in this question because I'm retired, and I don't have the first-hand knowledge of you know, the effects that it has on, you know, the workspace. But just by looking at the news and looking at the society in general, you know, the messages that are coming through, it feels as though people are, there's been a kind of a divide. Some working practices have thrived under, you know, COVID, under the pandemic, and some have been wiped out completely. That's in the extreme. And then there's others as well that have had to alter their way of practicing, a way of working, and I think it's an ongoing process. It seems like it's an ongoing process to kind of adapt to this new way of being. Some have decided to, well, stop the office environment completely, close it down completely, and just up to going online. And I think I've got a friend actually who his work has now gone. They're looking forward in the future to be completely online.
So how important then would you say it is for us to try and continue some kind of routine or running through this period? Because I do know a lot of people kind of run away with themselves as their days aren't as structured as they were when they were working in the office during that period. I remember I was talking to a friend of mine. She said for a lot of people, there's 3 jobs that you do when you go to work. You've got your actual work that you do. You've got the office politics that you have to deal with, and then you've got all the other transport, travel into work, and that's another job in itself. Yeah. So how important though is it for us to continue to have some level of routine in terms of dealing with the effects that this period is having on us?
Well, I think routine has been a difficult thing. It means that you have to devise a routine of your own. You have to be creative and devise a routine of your own, because before the work structure the day-to-day, travel, commuting to work, and getting dressed, even the little things like having breakfast or whatever, popping into the local deli or the shop on the way to work. All of these little things, these little nuances, in the work of the working day, is completely gone now. And now people are having to work out a routine of their own. And I think it's difficult when you've had a routine that has been made for you, to now having to reconstruct or construct a routine that suits you in working at home or working differently, has been a challenge. And I think I've heard that some businesses or some individuals in some businesses have found that so difficult that their performance has suffered because of this this shake-up of their routine. They haven't been able to sort of adapt to the new way of working. I'm trying to think of it on a broader level as well. I'm trying to think of musicians, people in the entertainment industry, and how they've had to change. Their work is face-to-face. That whole energy, that whole vibe of being on stage, performing in front of real people, feeding off the audience. Those people in sport as well, who feed off the energy of the crowd. You hear the pundits that talk about it, when they're talking about the teams. Would they have played differently if their fans were in the stadium? That human contact has gone, and so the whole experience of working, I don't know, it's
different.
It's so different. It's taken away what is most vital to us as human beings, and that is human contact, personal face-to-face contact.
That's an important point to raise. And it's not something that we talk about oftentimes when we do things like this, but and it's not something I'm that familiar with, but how do you think this period of time is affecting men's mental health? Because we do talk a lot about women's mental health, and I know we'll talk to Angela about that in a moment as well. But what about with men's mental health? Do you think that there's any significance that has affected men as a group of people?
There's actually a comment here that says that men seem to have done better, or seem to be coping better than women in this pandemic. I don't know how that could be, or why that is. Do you have any reason for that? But I've found that yeah.
I mean, I think even if there is some early indicators that men seem to be coping well, we have to be mindful that men's suicide rates are high, particularly in quite young working aged men. So we may not have seen the impact yet of mental health difficulties, but even if early indications are that they seem to be coping well, it might be that women are and I know this sort of sounding like distinct roles, but juggling a lot more. If they're doing homeschooling and working, it might be that that's quite sort of more challenging, or it might be that women are sort of saying more. Doesn't necessarily mean that that is actually the case.
That's right. But one thing that's jumped out at me, and this came out right at the beginning of the pandemic, in the first lockdown and the first wave, if you like, was that Black men fared worse. So what is this information about? That this might be more to do with the white population, maybe, because
so, Auntie Annie,
the statistics say that Black men have fared worse during this pandemic.
Oh, okay, so I think she's talking about their recovery rate from COVID. is what she's specifically referring to with that comment. So they've actually come out having a better recovery rate from the virus than women or other groups.
I think she's shaking her head saying no. I think
Oh, is that not it?
Yeah, I think she probably was talking about mental health, but I think you always have to, she talked about coming out of the lockdown.
Oh, coming out of the lockdown.
Their mental health perhaps was better, but I think you've got to sort of look at the research to see, well, what was that really specifically about? Yeah. And Joseph said, which population?
Yeah. One thing that that occurred to me, I did read earlier on in the first wave that Black men, Black men of color fared worse under the pandemic. They were more likely to become infected and become seriously ill, put on ventilators and so on, and then die.
I think the knowledge of that would have an impact on your mental health as well, wouldn't it? The knowledge that, you know, all of the knowledge that we have about BAME and you know, the impact of COVID, that would have an impact on your mental health.
Another point that was raised within this article was the effect of racism. And the effect of racism, wait for it, on the immune system. And their theory is that racism causes anxiety, and it's an anxiety that we all, as Black people, live with in a predominantly white society, a racist society. That although we may not be panicking, but we may be carrying a low-grade anxiety, which has an effect upon the function of the efficiency of the immune system. And that may be one of the reasons why the Black men were more prone to picking up the virus. That was a point that was made in the paper.
Okay, so we're seeing that COVID is definitely having effects on different groups of people. We've spoken about men, we've spoken about the workspace as well. People are changing their careers left, right, and center. As Olivia was saying as well, people are looking to do different things or pursuing different things. And those are some of the ways that different groups have been affected. But I wanted to go to Angela now to talk about women and also talk about the effects COVID is having on relationships as well during this period, if you have any insight on that, because I know that a lot of people in their relationships have struggled because of this period has put such a pressure on marriages, long distance relationships, etc., and also family strains as well, and relationships within homes. So I wanted to know a little bit about the effects you think COVID is having on our emotional well-being when it comes down to relationships, to start with.
Okay, women are carrying a lot of responsibility in the home, especially since the pandemic. And it's causing a breakdown in relationships at times because she's looking to her husband or partner to support her. And it causes, for some, arguments in the home. We do know that there's been a rise in domestic violence as well since the pandemic. We have some women who are having sleeping problems, so they're not getting enough rest, they're very tired, and they have the additional support, responsibility of homeschooling in some cases, or to support teachers who are doing online at the moment as well. So it's really a lot of problems for our women. Eating is also maybe a problem for some women because they're having to do so many things. They're not eating enough, so their immune system is being deprived. So we have a lot of women who say they're always tired, for example, they're not sleeping enough, and they just feel like they're wit's end. Some of them are quite fearful. So I think that's really what it is. As regards to relationship problems, people are not communicating very well. That's one of the things. They hide away. Husband's in one corner, the wife is in one corner, and the communication has broken down. It's been one of the main things that I've seen coming through is relationship problems.
Okay, I don't know if anybody else wants to touch on that as well. That's very interesting, especially what you mentioned about women having so many things that they're juggling every single day. And I definitely feel you're right in the sense that that is definitely going to have a knock-on effect on that person individually, but also in terms of the relationship. I'm just going to open the floor now just to ask if anybody else has anything that they want to add to that, and also if you can all have a think about maybe one tool or tactic that we can use to actually cope during this time. I know a lot of people right now feel like they're literally going to sleep to wake up the next day, to get through the next day, to go to sleep to wake up the next day, to get through it, and that can't be a way to live. That can't be a way to live. So I'm just going to open the floor to anyone if they want to add anything to anything we've already mentioned, but also if you can think about something that we can do to actually deal with that day-to-day living through this pandemic. Joseph, I think we'll go with you first.
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed is the split that it has created within communities that we live in. And on another level, it has kind of affected families too, where you have families are split between those who believe in they believe the science and those who don't, and the tensions that creates in the home adds greatly to the the mental health of family life. And but I have family members, not immediate family members, but who disregard completely the facts, the science that exists around COVID, and also within the church too, the division in the church about the facts that are put to us around COVID from the scientists, and how that creates this split. And you have this kind of manic disregard for the facts and almost a delusional dependence upon the alternative,
and I think
inverted commas, facts with no real evidence. Just, and it's created a tremendous amount of turmoil, and on a bigger level, a social unrest. We see it, played out this week in America. I think which Trump behaved, and the way in which his followers behaved, all of them without masks. Obviously not non-believers in the facts.
Yeah, I think that something that has become very true is the effect that social media has on people's mental health, because I saw, for example, some people from that thing that happened this week in America that looked like they completely were in a different world, because again you get fed what it is that you are interested in. So people are now living in completely alternative set of facts. How, Auntie Michelle, from your professional opinion, how do we deal with that, because yes, we see the larger scale of what that looks like in America right now, but also there is a sense that people in our church, as Joseph mentioned, are still also living in alternative sets of facts, and that does affect their mental health. So their understanding of what the pandemic is about, the vaccine, is very different to many other people. How do we actually combat that as a group of people, where you have two polarizing groups of ideas about something, but we're all part of the same church or the same group or the same country?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen friendships fall out over this, where people have, you know, and I think the fact that you're not physically together, you can't really have a debate in a, you know, you might have had a program and had a debate and had some experts there to sort of talk. Now we've got this online thing that people can choose to switch on or not to switch on. And you can, like you said, you start looking at one set of things on social media, and then you get a steady stream of things that sort of give you that, what we call confirmation bias. So everything that you believe in, you start getting feeds about that. So I think, you know, but leaders do have a responsibility, and organisations have a responsibility to put out information there to try and stop that sort of polarisation where people go, because, you know, the organisations like churches always have this polarised view. You know, we've got it on the pandemic, but you always have it with everything. Those who sort of take things to one extreme and those who take it to another. So I think there has been some information that's gone out to say, look, this is what the view is, you know, from sort of general conference. But I think maybe local leaders need to sort of get into debates and engage to help, because it's very confusing for young people, particularly if they've got an extreme thinking parent, to navigate what's right for them. What do they believe? What is the truth? But as Joseph was saying, even in households, you might not get an agreement. And I know I've certainly seen friends who haven't agreed to disagreed. They've just disagreed, and actually the friendship is no longer because of their strong views. So it's a difficult one, but I think as an organisation, if we can try and put out information out there that is sort of sound and calm, at the end of the day, people will have to make their own choice.
Decisions, yeah.
And make their own decisions. But I mean, if we can put out information that help them make an informed choice, then I think that's helpful and that's good. I was just going to say that in terms of the point that Andrew was making earlier, I was thinking about space in the home, how challenging that must be for some people in lockdown, that, you know, I'm fortunate to have a house with many rooms and we can all have our little areas for workspace. But, you know, even then it's a challenge. You've got to rethink, you know, we go into lockdown again and think, right, rethink, you know, where is the schooling area? Where is my work area? And I think for people who live in homes with no outdoors, no garden, a lot of people might have bought their properties thinking, well, I'm not going to spend much time in here. Most of my time I'm out on work, and then we're in lockdown. Your environment, you know, can have a big impact on your well-being because you're spending so much time there. So, you know, one of the things that I would say around sort of your well-being is trying to make your home environment as pleasant as you can. You know, have things around you that you like, things that you know, whether it's plants or, you know, outdoor window, or, you know, some kind of space, something that kind of gives you energy. And also trying, I think the other challenge of working at home, it's great, I love working at home, but the other challenge is you might not switch off. You know, when you're in the physical work environment, you can, if you didn't have a laptop, you could have left your work in the office, whereas now your office is your home, and you may have a tendency to just be constantly working. So, you know, sort of trying to find a way to sort of switch off and find something that you enjoy doing. I would say my sort of two things would be to be active. So to find a way maybe to go out. I try and go out every day for a walk and get fresh air. I think it's really important. And I do see people, obviously I don't get too close to them, but, you know, I think there's something about this human connection, even if you don't know the people, even if you're not really having big sort of conversations with them, just being in society, feeling there's something grounding about being out in nature and talking and seeing people. So I would say, you know, whatever works for you in terms of exercise and being active is going to help to boost your immunity and your well-being. And then the other one would be to try and connect with people. So, you know, maybe you have to be a bit more proactive now, because we're not bumping into people, you're not going into work and just people are just there. So maybe you have to pick up the phone, or, you know, find ways to connect. But yeah, I'd say sort of, you know, those would be my couple of things that I would say to try and do. You look at your surroundings and connect and be active, as well as eat well.
Okay, interesting. Olivia, what about you? What would you say is something that you would like to encourage people to do to help them cope through this next period that we're about to go through?
I think for me, kind of tying in with me personally, and also the field that I'm working in with children with autism, I think it's important to establish a new normal, rather than thinking, okay, I'm only in this for a little bit, let's do enough to cope in this little bit and survive in this little bit, because it won't be forever, and then I can go back to my normal. I think we need to readjust now how we think about our reality, and not relying upon going back to something, because even when things do change, it's not going to look like what it was before. So and it could come in stages as well. It might not be like an instantaneous, right, everything's open again, back to the way it was. I don't think things can go back to the way they were anyway. So I think it's important to accept what is happening right now and take control of what you want to be your routine, your habits, rather than thinking, okay, like I said, I'm going to go out. No, you won't go out every day. So, okay, what can I do that I can get enjoyment out of being at home? What makes me happy? What do I like to do? What gives me peace of mind? And it could be that, you know, like Dr. Michelle said about just doing, like, changing your decor and things like that can really have a massive effect. Having plants in your house as well can change your mood, and changing things like that. But it may also be in buying a particular book, or getting into a podcast that you wouldn't usually have gotten into. It could be that you even obviously, you know, learning a new skill and things like that, but cook something that you really love to cook and have that as your evening meal, and say, you know what, once a week this is what I'm going to do, because this makes me feel good, this makes me feel happy. And little habits like that, and maybe writing and journaling that you may not have done before, and maybe that you're into. The little, like, one thing that I like to, what I have just done, is I've written down all the books of the Bible. I'm looking at it right now on my mirror. Got a big mirror in my room. I've written down all the books of the Bible from top to the bottom. I just about got it in, which is quite satisfying. That I got all the books in, and I just go through them every day. As I'm looking in the mirror, I'll just go through them every day, and that makes me feel good as well. Sounds silly, but it's little things like that, little habits that can give you joy and satisfaction, that isn't relying upon Boris saying things are opening tomorrow. And so my normal is satisfying to me now. My normal is can give me joy and contentment, and I don't need to leave the house for that. I don't need to be going to work for that. I don't need to rely upon a Zoom session for that. That is just me personally in my life, establishing these little routines that can give me that satisfaction.
Okay, that sounds actually really good. Creating that new normal for yourself. I actually really like that a lot. That helps you realize, that actually helps you think about, like, just setting yourself up for what you need to do and not focusing too much on what's going on around you. So that's actually really sound. Okay, so Angela, what about yourself? Do you have any kind of advice that you could give for dealing with this next period of lockdown, for just people in relationships that are stuck in the house, their whole family all the time, or anyone else for that matter?
Well, I would say to design what I call a resilience plan. So in other words, you would put together a plan for coping with the pandemic. So daily exercise, for example, that's one thing that I tend to do. Also make sure that you eat well, make sure you're sleeping well, build up your immune system, drinks lots of water, for example. Make sure that you're doing a lot of breathing exercises, you know, taking in a lot of fresh air, a lot of deep breathing exercise. I bought myself a mini trampoline for jumping, and this is called lymphosizing. So it gets rid of all the toxins in your body. So that's another exercise that people can do right inside their house. Stretching and doing Pilates, for example, is very helpful. Also, listening to music is great for you. I also thought about things like supporting clients, and I've told lots of friends about it. I don't know if you've seen it, the Corona Anxiety Workbook, where people can go through the anxiety workbooks, just download it from the internet. Very good workbook for people who are struggling. And also journaling. I think Olivia said that as well, journaling. So we write down your thoughts and challenge the ones that are not so good. So those are some of the things that I would recommend that people can do. Oh, one more thing, spiritually feed yourself. Prayer, meditation, personal devotion and also when you do your prayer, you can have prayer with people as well as alone, because when you have two together, it strengthens you. And also seek to have a spirit of grace and gratitude. So those are some of the things that I recommend.
I like that, especially the spiritual element, because like to stay connected with God during this period. I know that a lot of people have found it challenging, especially when there has been so much uncertainty. So especially the spiritual application, just to continually stay prayed up and continually spending time with God as well through this time, I think really does definitely have an effect. So lastly then, Joseph, I just wanted to go to you quickly just to kind of give us your take on some of the things that you think, or just a simple thing that you may potentially think could help people deal with coping with this period that we're going into in 2021.
Yeah, I kind of jotted down something here. I agree with everything that everyone has said. I think it's sound advice. But I thought that one thing that has come out from me in my own personal experience is the mask. You know, the one thing that tells us that something is not right in our neighborhoods is the visibility of this mask. You know, we go into shops now and we see masks, and we go on the street and we see people in masks. If I had been a Rip Van Winkle and I'd just woken up and saw this, I would have think, you know, what's going on here? You know, last year, I was here last year and there was nobody in mask. How come suddenly, you know, everyone's in a mask? And I think the mask has become a symbol of either fear or protection. And then there's this more sophisticated idea that it's the government actually is trying to sort of turn it into, which I agree with in a way, a symbol of compassion, that we're not just wearing it to protect ourselves, but we're wearing it to protect the other person. And so I thought that the way in which we get through this pandemic is by each of us showing some sort of compassion. exercising compassion. And that is so easy to do. It can be in a big way. You know, you can, you know, join a charity or something like that where you can help people, deliver goods, you know, food parcels to people or whatever on their doorstep and so on. Or you can just wear a mask, you know, whether you agree with it or not, but it's something that you can do to alleviate the anxiety that the other person might have in their contact with you. So, you know, I think the way to get through this is compassion.
Excellent. I actually like that. And I think that that is a great way for us to end this conversation today. Just that compassion and consideration for the other person in general. If you have that mindset going through this next period, I think that we could all end up leaning and supporting each other through whatever it is and the things that affect our mental health, especially going in through to next year. I can talk for myself and say that my mental health definitely took a hit in 2020. And it was hard because everybody's mental health took a hit. So it wasn't as if like you could start telling people or looking for advice or whatever, because it was almost like anytime I mentioned it to somebody, they would say, yeah, well, you know, everybody's going through it this year. And I would think to myself, so I don't want to say anything to anyone because everybody's going through it. So it's not just you kind of thing. And that was really frustrating for me because it meant that you couldn't actually get help. But then you know that when people come to you and tell you about the tough things that they're going through, you don't have that same attitude. So you are there to be there for others, but you are struggling yourself. And everybody that you speak to tells you everybody's going through it this year. And that was really hard for me to wrap my head around, because it was like, well, I can't say anything about this. But one thing that really has helped this year is actually, for me personally, is getting a therapist, because just sitting down, and at first I didn't even want to do it. And I remember the first time I went into my first therapy session, and my older sister forced me to go to therapy. So I went to the session and I went in there with the mindset that this was not going to help me. Like, what could possibly help me right now with everything that's going on? And I had this mindset when I went in there, and then I was like, this is not going to do anything. And the moment she asked me one question, and I was like crying after 2.5 minutes of just going in there for the first time, because she was saying to me that I was like, had a massive cloud above my head that was just full of so many different things. And that realization I didn't realize until I actually started to speak to somebody and go through therapy. And so I want to encourage other people that might be watching this this recording as well to consider the thoughts about going to therapy as well. I think that and getting counselling is something that can be really helpful. I don't know, Auntie Michelle, if there's anything that someone should look out for when they're maybe looking for a therapist, because I know in my own experience, I kind of just got put with someone because it was an emergency situation. But if you are trying to look for someone to walk through a therapy journey with you, or look for a counsellor, like, is there anything that we should be looking out for in terms of the person?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that you've done is just broken down some barriers to people accessing support, because what we're seeing at the moment is we're getting more and more complex difficulties because people aren't going for support early enough. So thank you for being so open and honest about your own therapy journey. In terms of a therapist, I think you want someone who actually listens to you. A good therapist should be adapting what they're doing based on how things are going. So you have something we call the therapeutic alliance. So that is how you're getting on with the person you're working with. I would say if you have accessed therapy and you're feeling it hasn't gone so well, don't give up on therapy. It might just be that particular therapist or their mode of working just doesn't suit you, but it won't be that therapy in general you should avoid. So, I mean, I think you'd look out for somebody. It will be challenging. You might cry. You know, it might bring up distressing feelings, but hopefully they're not going to leave you like that. You're going to be working through things. But it might be that you're working with someone and you're just feeling like it's just not working for you. So you try and give some feedback to that person, but if it doesn't really work, then you might have to ask to see somebody else. Some people don't have much choice because you're accessing a free service. Maybe you can't afford to pay for it yourself. So you've just been put with somebody, but you'd still be able to have the opportunity to say, actually, it isn't working with me with this particular therapist, please could I change? But I'd say give it a go first, because it might be your own resistance that you're coming up against. It's actually, like you said, you went in the mindset this isn't going to work. So you've got to look and see, is it me thinking this isn't going to work and I don't really want to be here, or is it actually that I don't feel like I'm being heard and listened to or moving forward with this person?
Okay, excellent. That's great. Well, I just want to say thank you to all the guests that we've had on this recording today. I've learned a lot, especially about kind of dealing and coping with it. And we've gone into a bit of information to do with different groups of people and how they are being affected, and some of the things that we can kind of take away from here today in terms of helping us navigate through our mental health. I know that this year, 2021, we are going to be focusing a lot of our attention on putting on programs that will help people cope with their mental health during this period of time. So it's going to be open for everybody to join, and more information will come out soon as the programs come up. So stay tuned for that. But again, I'd just like to say thank you to Dr. Michelle Sancho, Olivia, Joseph, and Angela for joining us today and having this conversation with us. We really appreciate your experience and expertise in this topic. Auntie Annie, I don't know if you have any closing remarks?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to also give a vote of thanks. Thank you, Ruel, for hosting. Thank you, Dr. Michelle Sancho and Olivia and Joseph and Angela, because it's important that we have these conversations. It's necessary, it's important that we go past the theory and we have real talks about what people are experiencing. We know that there is immense pressure on the mental health service. There was immense pressure pre-COVID. Now, due to the pandemic, there's even more pressure. And we also know that how people navigate themselves through the pandemic is really dependent on mindset. It's also dependent on their circumstances. You know, we know that people who are living alone and are cut off from relatives and friendship groups and things like that, they are struggling. But we also know that some people have fared very well, like children with autism, and the statistics shows from CAMHS that children with anxiety have fared really well with the lockdown, being able to learn at home in their environment, not having to face things like separation anxiety and all the general anxieties they would in a normal school day. But we also know that this has impacted our youth. Our university students, we see the way that they're behaving and the way that they are responding to the pandemic, in the sense of, yeah, it's not real, it's conspiracy and things like that, because they are social beings and they need to be together. We see that when the government decided that education was going to be dealt with at home, you know, learning from home online, it created confusion, especially for children of primary school age, because they weren't adapting to the online learning. So whereas it may have suited the older ones, it didn't necessarily suit the younger ones, and they began to manifest behavioural problems and things like that. So these are important topics that we need to have. You know, we need to look at how it's affecting our seniors. We need to look at how it's affecting the Black community, especially those who have lost loved ones and couldn't support them in the hospitals and things like this. And I think this is a start to that conversation. and I think it's important that people know that there are people out there. Since the lockdown, one of the positive things is you can get counsellors all over, even if it's international. You know, there are organisations out there, and I'll put some in. And if you guys want to type some links in as well that people can access. But this is necessary, and I thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule just to stress the importance of us having these conversations and things like that. But just one final thing is to say that when you're looking for a counsellor, it's going to be very different. So some people may be looking to understand, why has this problem occurred, and want to understand the problem, while other people don't want to understand why the root of the problem has occurred, but they want to find solutions. And that's why you find a range of therapies. So you've got the CBT, which I won't go into now, you've got DBT, you've got psychotherapy, you've got solution focused therapy, you've got behavioral therapy, you've got a range of different types of therapy, you've got parenting groups, you know, there's a range of things out there, most of them being offered online that can be accessible. Okay, so once again, thank you, and wish you all a good evening, and tune in because we've got a range of programs that we will be featuring. Okay, thank you everyone.